We'll pull up item 6.17, Ms. Moon, which is to consider a resolution authorizing publications of notices of intention to issue tax and waterworks system surplus revenue certificates of obligation and electric light and power system revenue bonds.
Okay. Hello again. This is a resolution authorizing publications of notice of intention to issue certificates of obligation and electric revenue bonds. It's in amounts not to exceed for certificates of obligation 80 million, but we really have less than that in projects, around 72 million. And the revenue bonds we have not to exceed 23 million, but we're looking at around $21 million in projects. We will, at another date soon, be looking at potential savings from refundings too. We're not certain if we're going to have refunding, so as we get closer to our pricing date, we'll give you those numbers. I wanted to mention that the difference in the bonds and the project numbers are related to cost of issuances, potential premiums, and accrued interest. And also wanted to point out that when you're looking at this notice to publish, that it's not to an exceed amount, but it could be less, and it may very well be less when we get down to it. On the city side, our budget, our executive director of fiscal policy has already gone through quite a bit of this with our project managers and looked at what we potentially need and if there's anything that we just can't get to, and there has been some changes there where things might be delayed that was in the CIP, but we're not going to issue bonds. And she also went through and looked at any bond projects that we've issued in the past, and the projects are complete and there's excess funds in them, and we're going to use that money instead of issuing new debt if we have any unused bond proceeds that we can move to this year. So I'd be happy to report to you that she's already gotten the CIP down from 94.2 million to what we need in CO bonds down to 71.8 million. So we're pleased that we've done some work there, and some of it will be permanent savings because we have unused bond funds from prior years. LP&L CEO is also looking at LP&L's projects, which are now at $20,750,000 in this notice, but he's very close to presenting something to the EUB to make some changes there to also reduce some of his amounts down. It's just that the timing came after we had already published, so we'll get that in there when we come back to you on April 10th. That's our next timetable to come back to you. I wanted to introduce to you Jerry Kyle with Andrews Kurth, and he's our bond counsel, and if you have any specific questions, he would be the best person to ask tonight, unless it's projects, and we got Cheryl Brock here.
Mr. Kyle, good to see you. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you, Mayor. It's good to be here.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Kyle? Mr. Hernandez.
There's basically this item is for revenue bonds. Just to start off with, and for public consumption, could you explain revenue bonds?
Sure. And actually, there's two notices here. One is for certificates of obligation. Those are secured by a combination of taxes and revenues. And then the other is for the LP&L revenue bonds. And the revenue bonds are payable solely from revenues of the utility system, the electric utility.
So basically, the revenue bonds are paid back through the rates we charge the consumer.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
And then but there is something in common between revenue bonds and certificates of obligation, and that's they don't require voter approval.
That's correct. Yeah.
And they only require council approval.
That's correct, and publication of notice.
Could you tell the public why they don't require public approval?
Well, that's under state law. That's procedurally. That's how those are issued. Is with the notice of intent for certificates of obligation, followed by the city council action.
Okay. Now, one of the other questions I've got is, and and you might not be able to answer it tonight, but it's a question I've answered on a number of occasions from the dais, and I have yet to get an answer. How much debt for a city our size is adequate?
And that's really kind of a financial question that I really wouldn't be qualified to speak to.
Okay, so I ask it again. So hopefully one of these days I'll get an answer to that. Now, Ms. Moon mentioned that they've been able to lower the amount of the issuance in one instance from $94.2 million to $71.8 million as a result of using unused bond proceeds issued previously. And could you explain that? I mean, in layman's terms, what's happening there?
Yeah, I mean, based on questions that we've received from Ms. Moon and Ms. Brock, we've looked at some of your prior issuances to see what the certificates of obligation were issued for, and those line up with some other projects that you're proposing to do right now. And so rather than issue additional certificates of obligation now, you're looking at repurposing those unspent proceeds for these other projects rather than issuing more certificates of obligation right now. So it's basically brought down the size of your financing.
And Cheryl, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Actually, we had about $5 million left over, especially water. Water's where you're going to see the big change. We had about $5 million left from the Allen Henry projects when we finally got most of them closed. And so we looked at that, and I also worked with our water project managers who are awesome, and they helped me by looking at their projects really closely. And we had one project that is held up, won't be able to start this year. We had already issued a great amount of debt for it, and so we moved it to one that we were going to have to issue $16 million for this year. And I am happy to report we are issuing no money for that debt, for that particular project this year, because we were able to use bonds that were already issued, and we will reissue for that one, the other one that we took it out of in a future year. But it allows us to use the debt we already have sold, so that we don't have bond money sitting in the bank and paying interest on that we're not using.
And just for the public, what in effect happens is cities have to finance projects.
Yes, sir.
Major projects, so they issue bonds. In other words, they incur debt. And to make it real simple, they take out a loan, and then they get that money, and then they do the project. Sometimes the price of the project comes out a lot cheaper than the loan amount that they took out, so you've got excess funds.
Yes, sir. Basically what happens is when our project managers have to give us the dollar amount of their projects, they have not put them out to bid. So basically they're doing their best estimate using either with our own engineers, or we'll hire an outside engineer to give us the probable cost for that project. When we get to the market and start bidding that project out, if for instance there's not a lot of construction work going on, we will get really good prices for our projects. So what happens is those projects come in under. And as you well know, especially with Lake Allen Henry, we got really good prices on our construction, and so we saved a lot of money by doing that. But the project managers have no way of knowing when we actually, that's why we look at them. We look at those projects 3 times a year. You know, basically to say, do you really need it? You know, are you really going as fast as it's going to cost as much? And so they do a really good job of staying on top of their projects and knowing what they need.
Great. And so really the $94.2 million really hasn't gone down. You're just using other sources of funding to fund them.
We're going to be able to do the same amount of projects. We just won't be issuing as much debt for them because we already have money to fund them with.
Exactly. All right.
The only thing I wanted to make sure you understood is that only about $5 million from unused bond proceeds from prior years. The rest of it has been delayed out into the...
One of them was, the big one was still prior year bonds that we had issued that were delaying.
Y'all could have your discussions before you come to the podium, please.
Now, the last question I've got is this. So just to make clear, we're not talking about using any excess reserves to fund any of this. It's still new issuance of bonds or the shifting of old bond monies to fund these projects.
Yes, sir.
All right, great. Thank you.
Anybody else from the dais? Mr. Kyle, thank you so much for being here. Ms. Brock, Ms. Moon, thank you all for all of your work. I'm going to go back up to item 6.16 now and entertain a motion to accept the City of Lubbock CAFR.
So moved.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries 7-0. And I'll entertain a motion on item 6.17 to authorize the publication of the notices of intents to issue these revenue and obligation bonds.
So moved. To approve.
Second.
2 motions and 2 seconds. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Thank everybody for their patience, and thank you all for being here. We do want to get some gentlemen on airplanes and get them off the clock.